Hi there, welcome to Floating in Books. Today's video is going to be all about how you can read to learn another language. So welcome to everybody joining me today. I have another bookish video for you today to break up the decluttering mayhem that we've got going on the channel right now. I thought I could split my wardrobe declutter into several parts and then show you those over time. So you're going to get some more decluttering bits for sure, but I also still want to come on here and talk about books. So that's why I have another video for you today. And in case you're not sure who I am, then it may be good to know that my day job is actually teaching. I work in education. I have done ever since I graduated, and my main form of employment has been English teacher in the Netherlands, and that's where I'm from. That's where I did my degree, and I have been teaching English to people whose native language isn't English for more than 15 years. So in a way, I have a bit of a professional interest in this video as well. I'm just going to be sharing you the tips and tricks that I have also shared with some of my students over time. And just let you know, like, hey, if you want to, you can very easily learn another language just by reading. So tip number one is actually just to read. And very often I would get questions from students who were struggling with their English and like asking how they could improve it. And actually one of the best ways to improve your foreign languages is by actually reading and consuming as much media as possible in the target language. So for instance, if you're someone who's trying to learn Dutch, or if you're trying to learn Chinese, or whatever language it is you're trying to learn, it's actually most helpful to just consume as much as possible, be it television series or reading news articles online, and also reading books. Now, when it comes to reading, some people think that, you know, I have to read a certain like type of book in order for it to count or whatever. But especially depending on where you are in your language journey, just reading, getting started is all you need. Whether that is, you know, just a short news article that you found somewhere, which can already be difficult enough. You don't have to read novels or like classic literature at all when you're first starting out. That's not something that I would recommend you do. Don't start with Shakespeare, please. But we're going to talk in a little bit about where you can start there, but trying to do a little bit of language every single day is what's going to be most helpful when you're trying to learn a language. We're back. My camera battery died. But yeah, I was saying how it's just really important that you consume a little bit of the language every single day, whether that's as a television series, just watch an episode of your favorite television series in the language that you're trying to learn. Listening to music can be really helpful. Any way that you can sort of get yourself acquainted with what the language not only looks like, but also what it sounds like, is going to be really important for your receptive skills, so to speak. Step number two is then, what do you actually consume? So depending on where you are at your journey, you really don't have to read really long novels, as I've already mentioned. Very often, that's just not a very helpful start because it can actually lead to incredible frustration. And if you don't understand things, then it can actually be really difficult to actually like find enjoyment in it. And if you enjoy something, it's so much easier to keep going than when it starts feeling like a chore. So if you do want to read a larger like piece of writing, like a novel, it may be good to limit yourself to like a chapter a day or maybe like 10 pages a day. You'll get there in the end because your target isn't just to enjoy the story, your target is to learn the language. Then you may want to use different strategies to still get enjoyment out of it, but also work on your English at the same time, or whatever language you're trying to learn. There's a lot of media around, of course, if you do try to learn English, so that makes it super easy. But because of the internet, I think you can very easily find media produced in any language. If it's a language that doesn't just have oral history, then you may have to actually travel to the people speaking that language in order to be able to learn it. But I'm assuming here that it's something you may want to do for school or for work, and then you can usually find those languages quite easily online. Save for cutting a story into pieces and just reading a little bit every single day if you're trying to read for learning a language, I also think it's going to be really helpful if you read along with an audiobook. My recommendation, though, is not to speed it up. I know a lot of people in the online booktube, book talk, bookstagram sphere read audiobooks at a higher speed. But if you're trying to learn the language, the reason why you're going to read along with the audiobook is so you can hear how the words are pronounced, which is really helpful for your brain to process the language. And it's actually better if you were to slow it down rather than to speed it up. Yeah, so it's really a matter of comprehension and being able to understand what's on the page and really getting a feel for the language. Audiobooks while reading along with the actual physical text is going to be so helpful. This is also a great tip if you are someone who struggles to read. So if you're someone with, a shortest attention span or, a dyslexia, whatever, then audiobooks can be a lifesaver just to get through it. And if audiobooks aren't available for the text that you are trying to read, then there are tools where you can actually import the text. And I think Google Chrome actually has an extension that allows you to click a button and it will read it out to you as well. It's perhaps not as helpful as an actual audiobook that is well narrated, because that is, of course, going to be some like computer auto-generated voice, but it can still be helpful for just getting a feel for what the words sound like and how things actually work. So making a combination of an audiobook and the actual physical book can be very helpful if you're trying to, again, read for learning the language. Tip number 3 is really about if you have graduated to that level of I want to start reading actual books because maybe you just love reading books. Again, the advice is not to jump in off the deep end and go in with a hardcore classic. I think that the best bet is to start with a children's book. Start reading the kind of books that the kids in that language would learn to read with. So those can be harder to source if you're not in the country where the language is spoken. But again, you can find a lot of like reading tools very often that teachers use online. So if you have a Google, you can find them. So if you're trying to learn to understand another language, then it may actually be helpful to start like going back to like what a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old would actually learn at school in terms of like getting used to reading and writing as well. You're probably going to advance through that stage really easily, so I wouldn't recommend like buying a load of books, but really starting with what kind of books kids would start reading themselves when they are very young can be a very easy way to ease yourself into those into reading longer stretches of text. Those books very often have shorter sentences. They have less more simplistic vocabulary, so that can be really helpful as well. And something that I did myself when I was still learning English, because I knew I wanted to study English and I had to up my level of English at some point, was read Harry Potter. And I actually have taken my copy of Philosopher's Stone, this exact one, 2 classes before to show my students as well. Like I didn't grow up speaking English, so I've had to learn everything. Like every word I say to you right now, I've had to learn at some point in time, consciously. And what I've done when I read my copy of Philosopher's Stone is that I underlined some of the words that I didn't understand. And I read this, I think, for the first time when I was 15 or 16 years old. And I knew I had to up my vocabulary. I had to learn. I had to know more English. So this is where that journey for me started. And so finding something that's perhaps, middle grade YA-esque, if you can find it in the target language you're trying to read, of course, then, because that's just not a thing in all languages, but trying to find more simplistic language can work as well. I'm not saying this is simplistic language or YA simplistic language, but there's a reason why those books are targeted at different age groups. There are different topics in there. Different language will be used, different grammar will be used, and that way you can sort of climb up the ladder and acquire more language as you go along. Like by now, I don't underline words in books anymore that I don't understand. I sometimes go and look things up, but very often I could just tell from the context what something might mean. And I can just like go on and it's fine. So that's another thing. Tip number 4 has to do with that underlining. Once you do get into a story, then underlining words, looking things up. So again, going at a slower pace and not just reading through it isn't going to be really helpful if you truly want to learn a language. You may want to take a slower pace, maybe make some flashcards, write summaries, especially if you're trying to work on learning the language. Then writing a summary in that language of something that you've read is really great for retention, but also to see if you can use some of the words that are in the story or that are in the text you are trying to read, whether you can apply it to context. So you can very easily use reading to create more level up your language, you could say. So by listening and reading and then making a writing exercise out of it, and if you know someone else who perhaps knows more language than you do in that target language, or is at a similar level, or even if they don't have a similar level, and you can talk to them about it, then that can be really helpful as well. I mean, one of my main ways for maintaining my own level of English is creating YouTube videos, I'm not gonna lie, especially now that I'm no longer teaching English. I don't have to give it that much thought. So yeah, so being able to write things down and maybe talk to people, or record yourself talking, like giving a summary, whatever, maybe start a book talk account if that's what you want to do, can be really helpful with learning a language as well. But finally, the most important tip I can give you is to try and just read as much as you can in the target language as you can. Just getting the miles into your system, like just getting it done, is so much more important, and you'll find that as your linguistic ability grows, that you can do more of that language for longer stretches of time until you can pretty much function in that language in your day-to-day life. So that's why, again, trying to read as much as possible in the target language. Now, start small, do little bits here and there, depending on where you are. But once you get to that higher level, you should be able to do longer stretches of it, and you might be able to read not just for 10 minutes, but you might be able to up it to 30, then an hour, 2 hours. And that's also a great way to train your attention span if that's something that you're struggling with. That is something you can train. Maybe you want to set an alarm or do anything like that. But yeah, you can very easily incorporate language learning into your day-to-day activities by choosing wisely, and perhaps the things that you currently do in your native language, that you now start doing them in the target language that you're trying to learn. That's the ultimate tip, really. So I really hoped you enjoyed watching today's video. I know it was a little bit different. It has to do with reading, but not quite. But yeah, these are all of the things that I have shared with students over the years of, if you want to read and you want to learn and you want to improve your language, then these are some of the top tips. So I really hope you enjoyed watching today's video. Thumbs up the video if you liked it. Subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more by me. I make 1 video a week over on this channel, but I also have a makeup related channel where I post 4 times a week. I have a TikTok account. I have a blog. So if you want to see more content created by me, then you definitely can. So if you'd like to stay tuned for all of that goodness, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye-bye.